I used to see her most often at the corner coffee shop. Not because I planned it, our building just had thin walls, and I learned to time my mornings around hers. She liked the place early, before it filled with students and people in suits. I think she liked quiet. She was older than the rest of the regulars, mid-40s maybe. Dark hair cut to her shoulders, always tucked behind her ear when she leaned over her book. She wasn't flashy about anything. That's what made it harder to ignore her. The barista knew my order, black coffee, nothing special, but one morning she was ahead of me in line and said, without looking up, "He'll want it without sugar." Like it was nothing. The barista laughed. I just nodded, pretending I wasn't embarrassed that she noticed something so small. I didn't say anything then. I never do right away. But I carried that line around all day, like a song stuck in my head. Most evenings, my apartment was too quiet. I'd leave the TV on mute just to trick myself into thinking someone else was there. My phone stayed face down on the table, half-written text sitting in drafts. Sometimes I'd type to old friends and delete before hitting send. I didn't really want to explain my life here, and I wasn't sure they'd care. She lived next door, and I knew it in the practical ways first: the sound of her keys jingling late at night, the low hum of her kettle, the faint trace of perfume when she passed in the hallway. The kind of details you only notice because you're alone enough to catalog them. Once, carrying groceries, I held the elevator for her. She had one hand full of mail, and the other clutching a thermos against her chest. She said, "Thanks," quietly, like she hadn't expected kindness to cost someone else time. I didn't reply fast enough. The doors closed, and I spent the ride up staring at my shoes. Tonight, though, something shifted. I had been sitting at my desk, pretending to study, when the clock clicked past midnight. My coffee was cold. The building was silent. And then, 3 knocks. Soft, uncertain. I froze, at first thinking I'd imagined it. But then it came again, closer, the kind of knock that carried hesitation more than urgency. I opened the door a crack. She stood there. No coat, just a sweater, her hair a little undone like she'd been restless. Her eyes flicked to the floor, then back to me. "Sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't." She stopped, folded her arms tight across her chest, then let them fall. I realized I was gripping the doorknob too hard. "It's fine," I said, though I wasn't sure what it meant. For a moment, she didn't speak. The hallway buzzed faintly with the overhead light. I caught myself glancing at her hands, the way her fingers fidgeted against the hem of her sleeve. Finally, she leaned in, her voice so low it barely reached me. "I just needed to tell someone. I can't sleep." And then silence again, heavier this time. She didn't explain. She didn't move. I nodded like I understood, though I didn't. My throat felt dry. Behind her, the empty hallway stretched on, waiting. When she finally looked up, our eyes caught for a second too long. Then she gave the smallest smile, tired, almost guilty, and whispered, "Good night." She turned back to her door, leaving me standing in mine, the knob still in my hand. I closed it slowly, the air different now, charged in some way I couldn't name. On my desk, my phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. "Can I tell you tomorrow?" The next day, I kept checking the hallway like some nervous kid, listening for her keys, the creak of her door. Nothing. Until late afternoon, when I came back from class and nearly tripped over a small bag outside my door, ginger tea, with a note clipped to it. "For better sleep. L." She'd signed just her initial. I stood there longer than I should have, holding the bag like it might explain itself. Eventually, I knocked. When she opened the door, she looked almost surprised, like she hadn't expected me to return it. "Oh, you're back," she said, brushing hair behind her ear. "Thanks for this." I held up the tea. "You didn't have to." Her smile was quick, then gone. "Neither did you. Last night. Listening." I wanted to say I hadn't done much, but the way her voice caught on the word, listening, made it sound like it mattered more than I thought. Inside her apartment, the air smelled faintly of lemon and old books. She offered me tea, and I didn't refuse. We sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, 2 mugs steaming between us. "You don't sleep much?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not lately." Then after a pause, "It's been worse since the divorce. Empty spaces are louder somehow." The word hung there. Divorce. I looked down at my mug, tracing the rim with my thumb. I wanted to ask questions, but I also didn't. Instead, I said, "I know what you mean. About spaces being loud." She tilted her head, waiting. "I keep the TV on at night," I admitted. "Muted. Just so I don't feel like I'm the only one here." Her eyes softened in a way that felt dangerous, like she'd found a part of me I usually kept buried. The kettle ticked softly as it cooled. She wrapped her hands around her cup, then glanced at me. "You're too young to know that kind of loneliness," she murmured. "I'm 22, I said, half defensive. She smiled faintly. "Exactly." I laughed under my breath, but it didn't reach all the way. The age gap sat between us now, invisible but undeniable. My mind flicked to how it might look to others, what they'd assume. The word forbidden whispered somewhere inside me, though either of us said it. We let silence stretch, but it wasn't empty. Her fingers tapped lightly against her mug. My eyes kept flicking there, to the movement, then back up before she could notice. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Sometimes I think I talk too much to walls. It feels strange, suddenly having someone hear me." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I don't know why that moment stayed with me," I said carefully. "Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me." Her gaze caught mine then, steady and unflinching. Something shifted. She reached across the table, not far, just enough to brush her hand against mine as she took my empty mug. A small, ordinary gesture. But her fingers lingered half a second too long. That half second is what followed me back to my apartment, looping in my head, long after the tea was gone. The next week, it became routine. Not planned, not spoken about, just a quiet pattern. I'd hear her kettle at night, then a soft knock, or sometimes she'd leave her door slightly open as if expecting me to pass by. We talked about small things. Music she used to like. The way the building's heat rattled the pipes. I told her about the job I hated, about how the hours felt stretched thin. Nothing important, and yet, everything felt heavier in those conversations. One evening, I found myself helping her move a box of books. She'd been struggling with it in the hallway, her hands slipping on the cardboard. "Here," I said, taking it from her. "You don't have to, it's fine." Inside her apartment, she cleared a space on the floor, brushing hair from her face with the back of her wrist. She looked tired, but when she smiled, God, it landed somewhere in me I didn't expect. We crouched together by the shelves, stacking books side by side. Our shoulders almost touched. Almost. Then came the interruption. A knock at her door, sharp, quick. She stood up fast, brushing off her jeans. "That'll be Anna," she said, quieter, almost to herself. Her friend. I'd seen her once or twice in the building lobby, younger, all bright lipstick and questions. I moved back, suddenly aware of the way my shoes looked in her apartment, of how late it was. She opened the door just a crack. Voices. Laughter. Then silence again. When she closed it, she didn't meet my eyes right away. She pressed her palms to the edge of the table, as if steadying herself. "Sorry," she said. "She talks too much." I nodded, though it wasn't really about Anna. The spell had broken. I could feel her pulling back, like she'd remembered something she'd been trying to forget. Later, as I left, the hallway lights flickering overhead, she walked me to the door. She didn't need to. We stood there, neither opening the door nor stepping closer. Just the hum of the light above, and her hand resting against the frame. "Maybe this," she started, then stopped. Her voice was thin, fraying at the edges. I wanted to ask, "Maybe what?" But I didn't. Instead, I just watched her fingers against the wood. Small tremors, The kind that meant she was thinking too fast, trying to decide. I shifted closer without meaning to. Close enough to smell the faint lemon of her soap, to hear the catch in her breath. She looked up, eyes catching mine. For a second, either of us moved. The silence swelled, unbearable. My hand lifted an inch, too, toward her wrist, towards something I wasn't sure I had the right to reach for. And then she pulled back. Just a step. Barely. But enough. "Good night," she whispered, softer than before. The door closed gently, almost apologetically. I stood in the hallway, my chest tight, knowing we had been half a heartbeat away from something we couldn't take back. It was late, though not midnight. The city had cooled, the sidewalks damp from a light rain. We ended up walking without saying where to, just two neighbors carrying silence between them. She stopped at a small park near the main street. Empty except for one bench under a flickering lamp. We sat. Not close, not far. For a while, it was just the sound of cars in the distance, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I noticed she kept smoothing the fabric of her sleeve, over and over, like she couldn't sit still. Finally she spoke. "Anna asked me about you today." I felt my shoulders tense. "Oh?" She wondered why we talk so much. "Why you're always around." She gave a short laugh, but it didn't sound amused. "I told her we're just neighbors. That's all." I stared at the wet ground, the light glinting off puddles. Something sharp lodged itself in my chest. Just neighbors. I wanted to ask if she believed that. Instead, what came out was, "Do you wish I wasn't?" She turned, caught off guard. "What?" "Around," I said. "Do you wish I wasn't around so much?" The silence that followed was worse than any answer. Her lips parted like she might speak, but then she pressed them together. She sighed, leaning back on the bench. "You're young. You don't understand how people look. How they judge. I've been through enough of that already." Her voice cracked faintly on the last word. I looked at her then, really looked, the fine lines at the corner of her eyes, the weight in her shoulders. "I don't care how people look," I said quietly. She shook her head. "You think you don't? But one day you will." The words stung. Not because she was wrong, but because she was already building the wall between us higher, brick by brick. I wanted to break through. My throat felt tight, like the words were choking me. "I notice everything about you," I blurted out. Her head turned sharply, eyes narrowing as if bracing for more. I swallowed hard. "The way you tap your sleeve when you're nervous. How you tuck your hair back even when it's already in place. The way you—" My voice faltered. "The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." The air between us shifted, sharp and fragile. Her hands stilled in her lap. She didn't speak, didn't move. Just stared, as if I'd reached inside a part of her she'd kept locked. For a long moment, the world felt narrowed to that bench, that lamp, the space between our shoulders. She leaned the slightest bit closer, not enough to touch, but enough for me to feel the pull. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Do you know what you're doing?" I couldn't answer. Not with words. My chest was pounding, my palms damp against my knees. I turned inches from her now, the night holding its breath. And then she asked, softer still, so soft I almost wondered if I imagined it. "Do you want this?" The question hung in the air between us. "Do you want this?" But before I could answer, she drew back. Just slightly. "Enough." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her coat. "It's late. You should go." Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, tugging at her sleeve, restless. I wanted to argue, to ask why she asked me that if she didn't want the answer. But the words stayed locked in my throat. So I nodded, stood too, and we walked back in silence. After that night, things shifted. No more kettle whistles through the wall. No soft knocks. Even in the hallway, she managed to pass with a polite smile, distant, as if nothing had ever been different. At first I tried. I hovered near her door, listening for movement. I lingered in the coffee shop longer than usual. but she didn't show. A week passed. And then, one afternoon, I saw her outside, standing by a car I didn't recognize. A man leaned against it, older, holding a cigarette like it belonged to him. They talked quietly. She laughed at something he said, though it sounded forced, like laughter she wore like a coat that didn't fit. When she caught sight of me across the street, her face changed, like a door slamming shut. She gave a small nod, nothing more. I carried that nod home like it was a stone in my pocket. That night, I opened a draft message on my phone. I miss the tea. I miss, delete. Did I do something wrong? Delete. The words wouldn't settle. Every sentence felt either too much or not enough. Finally, I typed one line and left it unsent. Are we just neighbors again? I set the phone face down. Let it buzz once with a different notification. Didn't look. The following day, I passed by her door. For the first time, I noticed the small details I had ignored before, the faint smudge on the paint where her hand always pushed it closed, the welcome mat frayed at the edges. I thought of knocking. Just once. But I didn't. Instead, I went downstairs, out to the cafe, and sat alone with my black coffee. The barista asked if I wanted the usual, but it didn't sound like a kindness anymore, it sounded like a reminder. Across from me, her usual seat was empty. Her book wasn't there, her thermos wasn't tucked under her arm. Just an empty chair. And for the first time in weeks, I realized I wasn't heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I stared at that empty chair until my coffee went cold. It was raining again. The kind of rain that flattened the city into blurred shapes. I came back late, soaked through my jacket, and saw her standing by her door. Keys in hand. Not moving. She looked up when I stopped at mine. For a long second, neither of us said anything. The hallway hummed faintly with the old light overhead. Finally, she exhaled. You're avoiding me. It wasn't an accusation, not really. Just a fact. You're the one who disappeared, I said. My voice sounded sharper than I meant, so I looked down at my shoes. She leaned against the wall, her hair damp, sleeves pulled down over her hands. I thought it would be easier. Was it? She let out a small, humorless laugh. No. I don't know why, but I unlocked my door, then stopped with it half open. Something in her face kept me there. Something tired. Something braver than she wanted to be. I saw you, I said quietly. With him. The other day. Her jaw tightened. She looked away. That was my ex. He wanted to talk about the house. Papers. Money. All of it. The explanation should have eased something in me. It didn't. Why didn't you just say that? Her voice dropped. Because then I'd have to admit I noticed you noticing. And I can't keep doing that. The words landed between us, heavier than the rain. I shut my door fully, then leaned back against it. The silence pressed in, but I couldn't leave it there. A moment later, I opened it again. She was still standing there. Like she had been waiting. I stepped closer, just enough so we weren't speaking across a hallway anymore. My chest felt tight, my palms cold. You asked me once if I knew what I was doing, I said. I don't. But I know what I feel when I'm with you. Her eyes flicked up, searching mine for something, doubt maybe. Or a way out. I went on, voice lower now. I don't care if it looks wrong. Or if people talk. What scares me isn't them. It's not saying it. And then wondering, years from now, if you ever wanted me to. She closed her eyes briefly, as if the words hurt and healed at the same time. When she opened them, her hand came up, hesitating in the air between us. Not reaching, not retreating. Just suspended, trembling slightly. This could ruin me, she whispered. Do you understand that? I nodded, my throat dry. Yeah. But it could also not. The hallway buzzed. The rain outside thickened. For a moment, nothing existed but the few inches between us. Her hand finally landed, not on my face, not on my chest. Just the lightest touch on my sleeve, damp with rain. She gave the smallest smile, tired but real. "Okay," she said. And that was it. No kiss. No fireworks. Just the quiet knowledge that, for once, neither of us had walked away. Weeks passed. Not dramatic weeks. Just ordinary ones, filled with work, laundry, grocery bags cutting into my hands. But little by little, she was there again. Not like before, with restless knocks and half-whispered secrets. This time it was steadier. She'd lean on the railing when I came home, ask how my day was. I'd find ginger tea bags slipped into my mailbox. It wasn't a rush. It was a rhythm. One Saturday morning, I spotted her at the coffee shop again. Same corner table, same thermos tucked under her arm. She was already halfway through her book when I walked in. The barista didn't ask my order this time. Just handed me black coffee and nodded toward her, like she already knew. I crossed the room, unsure if I was interrupting. But when I hovered by her table, she looked up, and her smile was easy. Uncomplicated. "Sit," she said. And I did. We didn't need to fill the silence. The sound of pages turning, coffee cooling, people murmuring around us, it was enough. That evening we took a walk. The air was cool, the sidewalks dry this time. We passed the park. She slowed when she saw the bench under the lamp. "Funny," she said. "I used to hate this bench. Too exposed. And now?" She shrugged. "Now it feels different." I sat down first, leaving the same small space between us as before. She joined me, setting her hands in her lap. No tapping this time. Just stillness. I glanced at her, and she met my eyes. No rush, no fear. Just presence. Life didn't flip upside down. She still worked long hours, still dealt with calls from her ex. I still trudged through classes, the same deadlines, the same muted TV at night. But somewhere in the middle of it, there was tea waiting in her kitchen. There was coffee shared at 8:47 a.m., before the cafe filled. There were evenings where the quiet between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was comfortable. I found myself knocking on her door sometimes, not out of need, but just because I wanted to. And when she answered, it felt natural, like I belonged in that space. One night, as we sat at her table, I caught myself staring at her hands folded over her mug. Noticing, as always. She saw me watching and gave a small shake of her head. "You're still memorizing me," she said. "Maybe," I admitted. "But it feels less like memorizing now. More like just being here." Her smile then wasn't tired or guilty. It was steady, like the rest of her. She reached across the table, not tentative this time. Just simple, certain. Her hand over mine, warm from the tea. And in that moment, I realized the pause was over. The sentence had finally finished itself. "Sparkles, did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?"